Supaidaman, or Spider-Man, is a Japanese television series produced by the Toei Company that aired from 1978 to 1979. Now you may be asking, what exactly is Spider-Man doing on Japanese television? Well, it seems that Marvel Comics and the Toei Company had a licensing arrangement where each studio swapped various properties to use how they saw fit. While Toei created a live-action Spider-Man television series, Marvel Comics would use the protagonist robots from the anime series Brave Raideen, Danguard Ace, and Robo-Combattler V to create the comic series Shogun Warriors, which ran for 20 issues from 1979 to 1980. So in the States we got some Shogun Warrior toys and comic books, and in Japan they were treated to an exciting Spider-Man television series.
命が惜しかったらどけ!
Motocross racer Takuya Yamashiro gains the powers of Spider-Man from a dying space traveler called Garia, which he uses every week to combat Professor Monster and his evil Iron Cross army. Takuya Yamashiro is played by Shinji Todo, who would go on to play the Doctor who becomes Egos Kaijin in Battle Fever J, though he may be most familiar to fans of Super Sentai as General Hedra from Denji Man. Not to be forgotten are the traditional dramatic Japanese poses along with Spider-Man's frequent bold introductory catchphrases. However, this may tend to remind viewers more of the Great Saiyaman from Dragon Ball Z than 14th century Japanese no theater kata poses.
誰だお前は! 地獄からの使者、スパイダーマン!
When Takuya and Peter Parker weren't off making deals with Mephisto, Spider-Man also had a brief foray in Japanese manga approximately 9 years before the television series. Spider-Man the manga features another reimagining of the Marvel Comics superhero as a Japanese student named Yu Komori. About 9 of the 13 total arcs of the manga were adapted by Marvel into the English language during the late 1990s. While it has very little to do with the television series, it is an interesting manga in its own right and often goes overlooked. It wasn't actually until the new millennium that a friend of mine brought the title to my attention.
まさか。いや、調べてみる必要がある。
On the television series, Spider-Man, or Takuya, has a great number of special powers and equipment that he uses against his foes. For instance, Garia injects our hero with the Spider Extract, which alters Takuya at the genetic level, giving him traditional Spider-Man abilities, such as wall crawling and the extrasensory perception known as Spider Sense. Takuya also has his spider tracers, as well as an accelerated level of healing, just like his American counterpart.
シンジ君、私のことなら大丈夫だ。私には優れた回復能力がある。このままじっとしていれば、傷は治る。
本当かい、スパイダーマン。
タクヤはスパイダー星人の血を受けて、普通では考えられない回復能力を持っている。
Though there are some untraditional abilities mentioned, such as super pin drop hearing, night vision eyes, and spider smell.
この独特の薬品の匂い。
スパイダーマンはその鋭い嗅覚によって改造手術の時に使われたであろう麻酔薬の匂いを嗅ぎ分けることができるのだ。
The Spider Protector is the costume that Spider-Man wears when he goes into battle. This costume is actually stored within his spider bracelet, which, once activated, shoots out and covers his entire body in seconds. The method by which this change is accomplished is fairly similar to the way the Flash stores his costume inside his ring.
Spider Protector!
The Spider Bracelet is an item worn on Spider-Man's left wrist and had many other uses besides that of holding his costume when in civilian identity. Frequently in the series, Spider-Man uses the bracelet as a spider detector to reveal various adversaries or the Iron Cross Army's foot soldiers, known as Ninda, when they are disguised as human beings. If you've ever watched Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the Ninda are basically the putties of the Iron Cross Army. The bracelet also launches the Spider spider string and spider net that he uses to web swing or capture baddies. In addition, it is said that the bracelet can break any lock or safe. Finally, he can use the spider bracelet to summon his means of transport, such as his race car, the Spider Machine GP7, or his transforming starship called Marveler.
Spider Machine GP7!
The Spider Machine GP7 is a race car that Spider-Man uses to drive around Japan. It also has a flight mode, which is usually used in conjunction with docking inside the starship Marveler. The American Spider-Man also had his own car for a time in the form of the Spider-Mobile. The Spider-Mobile first appears within the pages of The Amazing Spider-Man issue 130 in the year 1974. While the Spider-Mobile had its own web shooters, ejection seats, and a spider signal spotlight, the GP7 is equipped with missiles, or machine guns. Marveler is Spider-Man's spacecraft, which transported his mentor Garia to the planet Earth. The name, of course, is in honor of the Marvel Comics group, which Spider-Man hails from. Generally, when Spider-Man summons Marveler, he is calling out the big guns. It literally has large cannons on its bow, which are often capable of bringing down the deadliest enemy. Because the giant robot or super robot genre is so popular in Japan, when conceptualizing the series, it was decided that Marveler would also transform into the giant robot called Leopardon. Since the Iron Cross Army's machine bems, or bug-eyed monsters, grow to gigantic size at the finale of every episode, Spider-Man's super robot Leopardon is quite essential in their ultimate demise. The Leopardon strings were defensive web lines used to contain machine bems, while arm rockets and the boomerang-like arc turn were long-range offensive attacks. Leopardon's fatal super move is called Sword Vigor, which involves throwing his sword through the body of his opponent.
Leopardon Sword Vigor!
Believe it or not, Leopardon was the very first super robot in Sentai. Prior to this point, the genre was simply referred to as Sentai, rather than Super Sentai. So, while Go Ranger and Jacker play their part in the beginnings of Super Sentai, Leopardon inspired all the future Super Sentai series that followed, giving them transforming super robots as well. So love them or hate them, you got Spider-Man to thank for the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, or their Zords at the very least. Now, I realize most people look at the setup for this series and think to themselves, what in the name of J. Jonah Jameson does this have to do with Spider-Man? But, in all seriousness, I think the show has a lot in common with its American counterpart, despite the obvious differences.
あんた、足のせがれと同じぐらいの年格好だが、ご両親はご健在かな？
いや、親父もお袋もいません。
そうか。そりゃ悪いこと聞いちまったね。ごめんごめん。
Now, I get that Peter Parker certainly is no motorcycle racer, but his motivations are certainly similar to that of Takuya Yamashiro. Just as Peter had lost his father, Richard Parker, to the Malik Red Skull's assassins, Takuya's own father is taken from him forever by the Iron Cross Army. Sure, Richard Parker was a super spy who worked for Nick Fury, while Dr. Yamashiro was an astronomer whose research exposed the Iron Cross Army, but the end result is the same. Not to mention the guilt that Takuya feels over his father's demise echoes Peter Parker's guilt over his Uncle Ben's death.
俺の体内にはスパイダー星人の血が混じった。ガリアは俺の命の恩人だ。そのことを一生忘れない。400年の間、ガリアは苦難に耐えた。彼のためにも、彼の一族とスパイダー星を滅ぼし、そしてまた俺の父を殺した鉄十字団を倒すことを誓う。 見ていてくれ。ガリア。
Just as Ben Parker was a mentor and inspiration to the American version of Spider-Man, so too is the character Garia to the Japanese Spider-Man. Garia's homeworld, Planet Spider, was completely wiped out by Professor Monster and the Iron Cross Army. Making the conflict even more personal, Professor Monster himself killed Garia's family. By nature of Professor Monster's title, position as head of the Iron Cross Army, and his visual appearance, he is often compared to Doctor Doom. However, the character's cyborg eye and cloak bring the Jason Masondale Hobgoblin to mind as well. Later in the series, it is revealed that Monster's longevity comes from ingesting the blood of other beings, which, if you are a longtime Spidey fan, probably will remind you of Michael Morbius.
I hunger.
すぐ人間の血がいる。それも多量にだ。400年生き続けてこられたモンスター教授を元気にさせるためには生きた人間の血が必要だ。
Now I know what this hunger is. Like the vampire bat whose genes I have inherited. I hunger for plasma.
We then learn that Garia had tracked the Iron Cross Army to the planet Earth. However, a bomb left by Monster ends up imprisoning Garia in a cave until Takuya discovers him some 400 years later. There, Takuya is injected with the spider extract that grants him his spider powers, much in the same fashion that the radioactive spider bite changes Peter Parker forever. Even after Garia's first quote-unquote death, he is transformed into a spider who communicates telepathically with Takuya until the great power of his great responsibility is passed on to Takuya.
そのガリアも山城拓也に全てを任せ、今生き絶えた。
さようならガリア。俺はきっとやる。あなたの死を無駄にはしない。
There are also other visual cues that tend to remind me of moments in the American comics, such as when Takuya returns a spider to its web, much like Peter Parker having that metaphysical moment during Kraven's Last Hunt, where he chooses not to squish his spider self.
こんなところに巣を張るからだぞ。大丈夫か？
Also, after becoming Spider-Man, Takuya doesn't have as much time to devote to his motocross racing, and is always having trouble with his finances one way or the other. Whether it's his own girlfriend, Hitomi, spending all his money, or his sister Shinko doling out the cash for motorcycle repairs, even though he's a Yamashiro and not a Parker, Takuya certainly has what's called the old Parker luck. Along those lines, Takuya frequently takes one for the team in his civilian guise, allowing himself to look like a weakling or coward so he can protect his secret superhero identity. Something that is all too familiar to Peter Parker, I'm sure.
君の兄さんったらひどいのよ。本当かい兄さん。どうして奴らと戦えなかったのさ。
暴力は嫌いだ。
だってひとみさんが殺されるところだったんじゃないか。
ねえ、あなたを助けてくれた雲人間？そう、その雲人間って一体何者？わからないわ。
スパイダーマンって言うんだ。
One element that is certainly different from Peter is that Takuya has two younger siblings. Shinko Yamashiro is Takuya's younger sister by 2 years, though in many ways, she is much a support system for Takuya as Aunt May can be for Peter Parker. She is the one in charge of family finances, as well as manages the entire Yamashiro household. Then, in other instances, she takes on the role of the attractive young lady who is obsessed over by a lovesick machine bem called Kabuton. In some ways, this brings to mind Hydro-Man's obsession with Mary Jane Watson in the animated Spider-Man series from the 1990s. Takuji Yamashiro is Shinko's and Takuya's little brother. The relationship between Takuya and Takuji in some ways reminds me of Terry McGinnis and his little brother Matt from the series Batman Beyond. Also, if any Spider-Man fans recall MJ's annoying cousin Christy, I would say that Takuji pretty much fits that bill as well. Sometimes the kid is a bit of a smartass, but for the most part he appears to have a good heart. Though there was a bit of a weird moment where Takuji is the bully to another little boy of the same age named Junichi. I suppose it's a bit of a character development to have Takuji learn a lesson and have his older brother scold him for being a jerk. He and the boy Junichi eventually become friends, but despite the life lesson, Takuji still remains a smart mouth, but leave it to his older sister Shinko to set him straight.
Nani?
僕も病人になりたいよ。だってスパイダーマンが来てくれるんだもん。
By the way, the occupation of Takuya's aforementioned girlfriend is exactly the same as Peter Parker's. Instead of the Daily Bugle, though, Hitomi actually works at Weekly Woman magazine as a freelance photographer who is always on the lookout for her next big scoop. She often has Takuya by her side at the beginning of an investigation, but usually once she encounters danger, it's Spider-Man to the rescue.
大丈夫か？
スパイダーマン、あなたいつも私を助けてくれる命の恩人よ。写真を撮らせて。
いや。
The most interesting character is the commander of the Iron Cross Army and Professor Monster's #1 subordinate, Amazonas. When nefarious shenanigans are going down in Japan, you can bet your britches that you'll find Amazonas at the bottom of it all. The main reason why I find the character so fascinating is that in my eyes, her American counterpart is none other than J. Jonah Jameson.
スパイダーマンの正体はレイさんの山城拓也だと思う。まさか拓也さんがスパイダーマンだなんてバカバカしい。
山城拓也は父親を殺されてるわ、鉄十字団に。
スパイダーマンになる動機は十分というわけですね。
一応マークしてみる必要はありそうね。死んだはずの男が生きていた。特ダネよこれは。
See, for the first 15 episodes, Amazonas actually maintains the alternate identity of the editor of the Weekly Woman magazine, Seiko Yoshida. Just as J. Jonah has his full hate going on for the American Spider-Man while Peter Parker brings him photos of the same, Amazonas despises the Japanese Spider-Man while Hitomi brings her photos of his victories as the editor of Weekly Woman magazine. Spider-Man finally discovers that Seiko Yoshida and Amazonas are one and the same, using his spider bracelet, after which point she discontinues the use of the editor identity as one of her many disguises.
週刊ウーマンの編集長吉田彩子、なぜここに？アマゾネス、今はっきりと正体を見た。
Amazonas goes through quite a few costume changes throughout the course of the series. Though Amazonas begins with her natural hair, in her second costume she wears a candy red hairpiece, which perhaps influenced the character Queen Beryl from Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon. However, by the series' conclusion, she is back to black, although she is still sporting a hairpiece.
できません。そんなことできません。
その可愛い目玉がえぐり取られてもいいのかい？
One thing that remains consistent throughout the series is her desire to expose Takuya as Spider-Man. Many times during the run she is very close, but to preserve the formula of the series, she never gets definitive proof until the final episode.
スパイダーマンめ、俺スパイダーマンめ、俺スパイダーマン、スパイダーマンめ。
There was also a theatrical release of the Toei Spider-Man in Japan that takes place between episodes 10 and 11 of the television series. You can tell by the appearance of Amazonas that this takes place during the early episodes due to the fact that she wears her original costume. Also, a brand new character is introduced that would mark the beginning of Spider-Man's partnership with the International Police Organization, or Interpol.
私の名は間宮重蔵。インターポール秘密情報部のものだ。
Mamiya Juzo is the head of Interpol's Secret Intelligence Division and manages to recruit Spider-Man, as they are mutual allies in the battle against the Iron Cross Army. Much as George Stacy is able to piece together that Peter Parker is the secret identity of Spider-Man in the American comics, Mamiya Juzo uses investigative skills to determine that Takuya Yamashiro is Spider-Man in the Japanese film version. By episode 11 of the television series, it's commonplace for Takuya to be seen contacting Interpol for any leads they have on the Iron Cross Army's activities in the area. In some ways, Interpol in Toei's Spider-Man is just like the organization S.H.I.E.L.D. from the Marvel comic books.
私は争いは好まない。だが敵が無法な戦いを挑んでくれば私は断固として戦う。
Another reoccurring ally that Takuya had on the series is the narcotics detective, Go Tachibana. In dress reminiscent of Clint Eastwood in a spaghetti western, Tachibana takes to the streets of Japan, hot on the trail of the Iron Cross Army's newest designer drug called MASH. The drug is harvested from the mushrooms on the body of the machine bem, known as Kinokogar.
キノコ狩りの男スパイダーは
Soon enough, Tachibana and Spider-Man team up to stop the Iron Cross Army's latest scheme. It's interesting that the topic of drug use is so freely brought up in what assumes is children's programming in Japan. In contrast, when drug use was tackled in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man issues 96 to 98 by the year 1971, the story went to print without the approval seal of the vaunted Comics Code Authority. But Stan Lee decided the hell with it and had Harry Osborn tripping balls without the seal anyway for a very special issue of Spider-Man. I'm not sure if Tachibana is the first fellow to use a machine gun guitar case, but the only other instance that I can think of is El Mariachi from Robert Rodriguez's trilogy of films. Tachibana's wife was killed by the Iron Cross Army, so in some ways he is reminiscent of the Punisher, whose wife and children were taken from him by violence. However, Tachibana is still accompanied by his son, Takashi.
これ以上進むことは無謀だ。力ずくでも阻止するぞ。
Takashi was witness to the crime, but suffers from repressed memories of the incident. Spider-Man initially objects to Tachibana allowing his son's participation in the case. Spider-Man reluctantly accepts the son's involvement once Tachibana explains he is trying to cure the boy of his amnesia, as Takashi is the only one who can possibly identify his mother's killer. Ultimately, Takashi comes to remember the machine bem Kinokogar was behind the killing. Not to fret though, because Kinokogar meets his just desserts at the hands of Leopardon. Speaking of machine bems, these monstrous opponents of Spider-Man rotate every episode, making a grand total of 42 machine bems if you count Big Monster, the giant form of Professor Monster. Some machine bems, such as Big Bat, seem to come from a pre-existing stockpile of warriors the Iron Cross Army has at their disposal. Big Bat also has the claim to fame of being one of the only machine bems that came very close to uncovering Spider-Man's dual identity.
私の睨んだところでは、スパイダーマンは山城拓也。
Big Bat brings to mind one of Spider-Man's foes from the pages of the Untold Tales of Spider-Man, issue number 2, the mutated teen known as Batwing. Eventually, Jimmy Santini learns to control his abilities and can change at will between his human form and his Batwing form, just as Big Bat can pose as a human being on the Toei series. Batwing would go on to be part of the 50-state initiative in North Carolina and is currently residing at the West Coast Avengers compound in Los Angeles, California, as a student of the Avengers Academy.
モンスター退治の専門家、スパイダーマン。
「 Other machine bems appear to have human hosts, or are humans that are artificially changed into monsters. For instance, the deadly machine bem Snake Woman is also a beautiful old acquaintance of Takuya named Shimako Kitazawa. As Shimako, her beauty makes her a rival for Takuya's affections, kinda like the rivalry between Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane Watson. This even leads to some jealousy from Hitomi when Shimako rides on the rear of Takuya's motorbike.
美人だな、島さん。
何よ、デレデレしちゃって。
Although the good nature of Shimako eventually overcomes the evil of the Snake Woman long enough to free Spider-Man from her death trap, eventually she simply cannot contain the beast inside her. Shimako chooses to destroy herself, much like the penultimate moment of the Dark Phoenix saga, in which Jean Grey sacrifices herself for the sake of the entire universe. This turn of events pretty much takes away any moral implications that would be leveled at Spider-Man, as the decision is taken out of his hands.
拓也さん、私は死ななければならない。さようなら、拓也さん。さようなら、拓也さん。
島子さん、なんということだ。
An example where a human being is modified or enhanced into a machine bem and used for the Iron Cross Army's own evil purposes is that of the simple-minded amateur wrestler Samson. Even though Samson starts out as an inept wrestler, the dim fellow still loves his brother who serves as his trainer. When all else fails, Samson foolishly looks to improve his wrestling skills by allowing Amazonas to make him over into a machine bem. Once Samson becomes a full-on servant of the Iron Cross Army, his appearance looks a great deal like the Fantastic Four's The Thing. Coincidentally, The Thing participated as a member of the Unlimited Class Wrestling Federation, or UCWF, within the pages of The Thing issue number 28 by the year 1985. Although The Thing's strength and appearance came from exposure to cosmic rays, other participants, such as D-Man, received strength augmentation treatments from the Power Broker. In his own way, the Power Broker's manipulation of the human body is just as shady as the changes made to Samson by the Iron Cross Army. Once altered, Samson becomes frighteningly cold-blooded and runs over his own brother without batting an eye.
Spider String! Samson! お前は自分の兄を自分の手で引き殺した。
One might make the suggestion that Toei's Spider-Man should attempt to revert Samson back to his human form, as his American counterpart has done for, say, Kurt Connors in the past. Yet once Samson goes down this dark road, you do feel that Toei's Spider-Man is justified in his annihilation of the monster with Leopardon's sword vigor. Besides, even if he did somehow manage to undo the surgery Amazonas had performed on him, who would want to go on knowing they were responsible for the death of their own brother? Seems to me, Takuya did the guy a favor.
冷血動物マシンベム殺しスパイダーマン
Another machine bem that is worth mentioning is the creepy-looking Dr. Miracle, who is apparently an old colleague of Professor Monster. She stops by to do him a solid by committing a series of robberies so she can lure out Spider-Man in order to paralyze and then eliminate him for good. While Takuya is recovering from her first attack, word arises that a necklace is threatened to be stolen by Dr. Miracle. Upon hearing this news, Takuya's sister, Shinko, even compares Dr. Miracle to the greatest thief in all of manga, Lupin III. So I'd say she's in pretty good company.
まるでルパンね、予告してくるなんて。で、一体何者？
ドクターミラクルと名乗ってるだけであとは謎なの。
ドクターミラクル
Spider-Man!
She can use her miracle mask to take on any form of disguise, and in this way she shares a modus operandi in common with the American Spider-Man villain, the Chameleon. It's sad that she was simply a one-time villain because I found the way she challenges Amazonas for her position as commander of the Iron Cross Army to be an engaging plot point that could have had much longer legs if they had given it a chance. Much later in the series, Amazonas would receive two new underlings who start out as mummified corpses. However, Professor Monster plans on reviving the former Amazon warriors to serve as lieutenants in his Iron Cross army. In the process of resurrecting the two female assassins, Professor Monster gives a great deal of build-up to their physical beauty. I have to admit, Professor Monster's hype had me pretty darn excited. I was expecting some sexy evil Sentai ladies on the same level as the luscious Beauty Zanette from the Super Sentai series Car Ranger, or Goanger's Gigaretia, who would later break hearts as a member of the G3 Princesses. Then we finally get to see Bella and Rita unmummified for the first time.
Spider-Man! お前を殺すために1000万年の眠りから覚めたアマゾンの女ゲリラベラ、鉄十字団の女ゲリラリタ。
Suffice it to say, I was pretty disappointed after all that hype. Going by her visual appearance and the name of the actress who plays Rita, Ree Reinhardt, the creators must have been going for casting someone who was not a Japanese native. Bella's weapon of choice is the bow, from which she fires poisonous arrows. Meanwhile, as awesome as arrows can be, her partner Rita seems to have her outclassed with a machine gun. If she could ever hit anything, I'm sure she'd be a force to be reckoned with.
女の気まぐれには並行するぜ。急に朝日が見たいなんて言い出すんだからな。
それが女ってもんよ。ねえ、結婚しようか。
In the early episodes, Takuya encounters a young orphan named Ichiro Murakami, who is in desperate need of a blood transfusion after an attack from the Iron Cross Army. Several episodes later, Ichiro would return the favor when Amazonas has inflicted a deadly poison on Spider-Man, and only their shared spider blood type can save him. Interestingly enough, the show never goes down the road of granting Ichiro any spider-like superpowers. However, in Spider-Man the manga, there is a similar blood transfusion between the protagonist, Yu Komori, and a young man named Mitsuo Kitano, which does result in two warring spider-blooded men.
ありがとう。僕たち兄弟だね。同じ血を分け合った兄弟なんだ。
'Cause we're brothers!
The character of Ichiro led to two really great episodes of Spider-Man, but that's cause he's the only child befriended by Takuya in the span of the first 14 episodes. But sometimes good things can be overdone, and eventually there were little kids in almost every other remaining episode. The television series track record tends to remind me of how the Gamera film franchise eventually had a child protagonist in many of its sequels. Following Ichiro on Spider-Man, there was the boy Junichi, who had a heart condition. Then there was the boy with his seemingly immortal dog Ricky, who survives plummeting off a dam.
犬笛に結びなく男、スパイダーマン。
Ricky the dog may kick ass, but that's not the end of it. Doesn't stop there. There's the boy who tells tall tales, the cockroach boy whose mother is the one with the heart condition this time around, the country girl with a magical amulet that gives her super strength, June, a boy whose dog is abducted by the Iron Cross Army to hunt down Spider-Man, Yoko, the girl with psychic powers, Nobuo, the amateur boy photographer who considers Hitomi his sensei, orphanageless orphans who lose the deed to their home because the greed of a gambler who was a former orphan, Shinichi, the boy who stumbles onto the mummified bodies of Bella and Rita, two different so-called youth detective clubs, and even alien children from another dimension.
なかなかいい腕だね。さすがスパイダーマンだ。
俺はスパイダーマンなんかじゃない。
Yet another little boy named Nobuyuki Nakayama has a grandfather who secretly moonlighted as the jewel thief Phantom number 107. Grandfather Nakayama actually is a lot like Rawl Chalmers, also known as the Black Fox. Both of them have the outset appearance of kindly old men, but in reality they are actually swindlers thriving on larceny. In the pages of Amazing Spider-Man, Peter Parker is usually taken advantage of by the Black Fox, since his kindly outward appearance reminds him of his dearly departed Uncle Ben. Black Fox has continued to appear in other Marvel comics, such as the irredeemable Ant-Man, but Nakayama is not so fortunate.
おじいちゃんはなぜ鉄十字団に殺されなきゃいけないんだ。
スパイダーマンはこの美しい瞳を持った信行少年に本当のことを言うことはできなかった。
Toei's Spider-Man frequently lies to the children he meets that are struck by tragedy. He tells a white lie to Nobuyuki to protect his pristine vision of his grandfather. In another instance, the young blind girl, Jun Otaki, loses a father after he is turned into a blood-collecting white-robed beast for Professor Monster. The father's final fate is to be dispatched by the Machine Bem skeleton beast when he refuses to turn over what his human side still recognizes as his daughter. Takuya simply doesn't have the heart to tell June what really happened to her father. While white lies are surely a part of Western culture, just as much as they seem to be part of Eastern culture, I don't think they would ever be acknowledged or explored in children's television in the 1970s in America like they are here in Japan.
お父ちゃんは？私のお父ちゃんはどこ？
よく聞くんだ、純ちゃん。お父さんはね、遠くに旅に出たんだよ。
どこへ？
純ちゃんの目が見えるようになったら、お父さんはきっと帰ってくるよ。
本当？
ああ。さあ、病院の院長先生が待っている。早く手術を受け、目が見えるようになろうね。
嘘を言わなければならなかったスパイダーマンの胸はキリキリと痛んだ。しかし絶対に真実を告げるわけにはいかない。
I have to admit that the final battles between Leopardon and the Machine Bems do at times become overly formulaic because of the overuse of the same stock footage. Production issues with the size of the Leopardon suit having a bigger size than the Machine Bem suits, and the apparent damage and eventual loss of the Leopardon suit account for the limited amount of footage to choose from.
スパイダーマン、金を貸してくれ。
なんだと？
倍にして返す。いや、5倍にだって10倍足やって返す。スパイダーマン、金はないのか？貯金はないのか？頼む、チャンスをくれ。もう一度チャンスをくれ。これと一緒の願いだ。
In the final analysis, Toei's Spider-Man can be quite entertaining to fans of both Super Sentai or Power Rangers. Even if you're only a fan of Spider-Man, though, I wouldn't let this discourage you from giving the series a try. It's a fun look at the story of Spider-Man from the perspective of a totally different culture that makes up a piece of the puzzle that is Spider-Man's history on film.
闇深く響く地獄の足音模様の下眠る父よ胸に秘めた非情の定めさらば友よ誓いの友よ俺はただ一人俺はただ一人荒野を走る夕べの丘に赤い日が沈む 愛の日々は幻の夢忘れてしまえ花の香りさらば友よ誓いの友よ俺はただ一人俺はただ一人荒野を走る鐘が鳴るとき訪れる別れ今は誰も呼ぶ声はない明日は虚し涙枯れてさらば友よ誓いの友よ俺はただ一人俺はただ一人荒野を走る